Okay, next up, we've got a 1988 movie from Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Now, it must be tough. This is called A Serpent's Path. It must be tough being named Kurosawa and being a really good filmmaker and having like the we got our dog coming in here, the Seven Samurai and all that kind of stuff existing, and Rashomon, and the most famous filmmaker of all time is a Kurosawa. But you are another Kurosawa, and you're from Japan, and people don't necessarily know your name as much. Kiyoshi Kurosawa is, though, pretty well known, especially in the horror and the Japanese horror community, because he did make Pulse, which is very famous and beloved from the early days of J-horror. And he also made a movie I love from a similar era than 97, 96, I forget what year exactly, called Cure. And that is a fantastic movie as well. Recently, I reviewed one of his most recent movies called, I think, Clouds. It's on a Criterion, and it is quite good as well. He made a short film, they sent us 2 films this week. I did not watch the short film, but I've seen it before. I saw it a couple years ago. It's a fairly recent film called Chime. And when I say short film, it's about 40 some odd minutes. And I'm not going to review it again here, but it is quite good. A little frustrating because it feels like the first act of a full movie and it leaves you hanging, but it is a short film, so you can only get so much. But it is definitely, I would say, in tone and in kind of mood, and it's somewhat in format. It's a sister film to Cure in that it involves maybe supernatural or kind of unusual events and some sort of a spread or a curse that can go from person to person. And I'm not going to really describe exactly what that is, but it's pretty cool. I definitely liked Chime, and hopefully Greg or Eric watched it and give you a full review on this episode. You've already heard that. I quite liked it, even though it's enigmatic and frustrating towards the end. To me, it was a really interesting beginning to what should be a full movie, I would think, at some point. Now, one more interesting thing about Serpent's Path. Once again, Serpent's Path is from 1998. It's one of his earlier films, and not lauded as much as the other ones I mentioned. I hadn't heard of it. Once again, I'm not a completist when it comes to this Kurosawa at all. But apparently, he has remade this film in the last couple of years. I know he made like 3 or 4 films in just the last 2 years. Chime was one of them. Clouds was one of them. I guess Serpent's Path was the other. So he's remade this movie just recently, in the last couple of years. I'm very curious to see it. I have not seen it. And I'm wondering how it would change or update with a almost 20-year span between the two. That would be interesting for me to see that for sure. So, what is Serpent's Path? Really basic, simple concept that I can describe to you, and then it gets complicated a little bit, for sure. First of all, it has his style, which is this kind of, he has this very cold, washed out look to his movies. He doesn't get overly stylistic with most of his movies that I've seen. They seem to be very grounded looking, but they always have a somewhat enigmatic, somewhat hard to grasp, full story. Like, you'll get the basic story, but there's always things around the edges that don't quite add up, and you have to try to decode and figure out. And this movie is no exception to that. So what is Serpent's Path? You start out with 2 guys. You've got Jima and Miyashita. And I'm going to describe Miyashita, I believe, as the father, and Najima is a teacher. They're 2 men about the same age, middle-aged dudes, like 30s. They're in a car. And from now on, I'm just going to call one the father and one the friend. Or one the father and one the teacher. I'll do that. They are friends, apparently. But it's easier, I think, that way than me just saying the names over and over again. And right at the beginning, they're sitting in a car, and you get the idea they're waiting, and you find out, oh, they're gonna kidnap somebody. And you get the feeling that the father is out for revenge. They pretend to be delivery drivers. They find their way into the person's house. They tase the person, and within a few minutes, you see the person chained up in an empty factory somewhere, like a rundown, beat-up factory. Almost looks like the room from Reservoir Dogs or something. It gets that feel for you right out of the gate. The father pushes up a TV, puts in a VHS tape, plays a grainy video of a young child playing, and then he proceeds to read the police report about the murder of his own daughter, which is, you assume is the girl that you see playing, just like playing smiling and stuff on the screen. And he basically goes into the clinical detail of the police report, of all of her injuries, and how she was assaulted and murdered. And the father says, now we've got you here, and I'm going to get my revenge because you murdered my daughter. And then you So then you've got the setup, right? There it is, revenge. They've got the father, or they've got the killer. The father's there. So for some reason, this teacher who's a friend of his is involved in this revenge plot too. And you're kind of like, wow, that's a pretty good or bad friend, depending on how you look at it. Like the person would just go on this kidnapping slash assuming to be murder, like a plot to get revenge for the murder of this other guy's daughter. That's a pretty loyal friend. But either way, you're not quite sure of his motivation, the teacher that is. That's your setup. But very quickly, there's a wrinkle thrown into that, and that is we'll call him the murderer, the murderer chained to the wall who's getting like no food. He's getting the food thrown on the ground. He's getting hosed down after he messes himself because he's not allowed to use the bathroom, all this kind of stuff. He's not having a good time. He's just waiting to be tortured and murdered, killed. And he, out of desperation, you're assuming, says, no, I'm not the guy. I'm not the guy. I could tell you who the guy is. The guy is this other guy. He was the head of the mob, whatever, and they were trying to get revenge on you. And this is the first wrinkle. You find out the father has some connection to Yakuza or mob or underworld people, that they had something out for him, possibly a hit, and that maybe the murder of his daughter was retribution against him. And this guy they've got chained to the wall says, it's one of the boss dudes in that group that you want to get. And I can tell you how to get him. He likes to go golfing. He's a terrible shot when he goes golfing. Go get him and bring him back here. He's the guy. And thus the complications begin on their seemingly relatively simple revenge plot, because now they're out to go get another guy and they're not sure which guy is the guy, and even if either of those two guys is the guy. And that's where you go with this movie. So I loved how quickly and how straightforward this movie just gets right into it and right into the complications of this kind of plot. And it isn't, I wouldn't say it's quite Coen Brothers-esque, but it's on the edge of that. There are some moments that are somewhat comedic, especially around how these two guys, which seem to be relative amateurs, how they deal with various members of this kind of, I guess, Yakuza gang, and how are they going to like subdue and get people into their lair when they're not really trained for that sort of thing. And how you have this kind of combination between these two. Once again, very kind of Fargo-esque in some degree, not as overtly comedic, but there's elements where the teacher's very analytical and the father is almost gleefully ready to just inflict pain, damage, and murder upon these people who have hurt his daughter. Understandably, but also a little bit too gleeful almost. He's very hot-headed. So you got these two kind of, not good cop, bad cop. You got calm cop, calm non-cop, crazy, ready to murder non-cop. And that's kind of your setup. That I'm going to say 4.5 stars. For me, this is 4.5 stars. This is a really solid crime revenge. I wouldn't say thriller per se, but definitely crime revenge movie. Really gritty, not really high budget, but very to the point and always engaging and always interesting to me. Now, some people might be dissatisfied by how it plays out, but I like how this continually upends your expectations, because whereas most movies like this are going to really be about what's the cost of revenge, and is revenge really satisfying, and does it really solve the hurt and the emptiness that you have that caused you to go that route. A lot of movies go that way, right? I think this movie is much more about, do you know who's guilty? Can you really figure out who's guilty and who is really guilty in this world? Because as it goes on, the actual known guilt of any of these people, including the two main characters, becomes highly in question. And I would think that would be frustrating for some viewers that want this to be a cut and dried revenge thriller. I think that might be something that would cut it down some levels to them. For me, it makes it a little more interesting to me, because it allows me to keep thinking about it and to keep wondering and to keep analyzing what's going on and figuring out like what is really secretly going on here. So 4.5 stars for Serpent's Tail, or Serpent's Path, sorry. Let's get the name right. Serpent's Path. Now, I'm going to do quick spoilers here, because I think it is interesting to think about what is actually going on here and the ending of this movie and how it plays out. So I'm going to get into a couple of things really quick here, and I would hope maybe Greg and Erik will have time to talk about it too, because I would like to hear their take on the ending of this, because I think there is some, it is not really clear and it could be read a couple different ways. So first of all, I'm going to really quickly, you got the two people now trapped in there. They're both saying they didn't do it. They keep getting people, and the people keep saying they didn't do it, but you're never sure if these people are just saying that to save themselves and they really are involved, or if they did do the murder. And it keeps going down that line to the point that one of the captors, they basically have one of the captors kill the other captor so they can narrow it down to one. Then they take that one out to a place where they're supposed to find the other guy who really did it, supposedly. And of course, that ends up being not real. And eventually becomes this kind of extended shootout, almost comedically, this extended shootout with the whole rest of that Yakuza gang in this other factory. But here's where some twists come in. And first of all, Cloud does some very interesting versions of that same thing. So this movie I saw just recently, he does another big extended shootout with a bunch of people in a factory that's also played out in a way that's unusual. So that seems to be a thing he likes to play with too. This kind of, it's this stereotypical crime thriller ending where everyone goes to a shootout in a factory or a warehouse or something. Anyway, our two main guys, they have a big shootout at the factory, and all of the Yakuza end up dead. All of them. And throughout the movie, we've been seeing short little flashbacks and sides where we get things like we see the teacher in his classroom, and he has this very, very smart, very young woman in his class. Like all the people, he's like a theoretical mathematician or something. And he's got like a whole class of like adults or young adult, late teens, 20s, older people. And he's got this one girl in there, it's like, I don't know, 8 or 9. Very similar to the age of the dead girl. And we keep seeing shots of him teaching her this class, and she's like the most intelligent person in the class. And we get to this shot where the father shows up after the class one time, meets with him, sees the girl, makes a weird comment to her, like she's really a good girl or something like that. And then after they part, the father follows the girl and stares down a hall, like an alleyway at her with this really creepy smile. And you're starting to think like, are they trying to indicate that the father might have killed his own daughter? Like this interaction he's having with this girl currently is indicating that maybe he did it? And you're not sure, and that's one of the first enigmatic things. Well, then we get to this big shootout at the end, and as the shootout's beginning, it's revealed by the teacher that they're in the warehouse where they filmed the murder of the daughter. And that had never been revealed before. We didn't know it had been filmed, which is, of course, horrifying. You see, like, chairs and a table and like tools and stuff. So you imagine she was horribly tortured, and it was all filmed for some sick videotape production that could be shared on the, not now it'd be like the dark web, right? But then it would have been just underground, I guess, mailing to people. I don't know how they would do it. Kind of like a 8mm, I think was that movie that had Nick Cage, kind of similar idea. So that's revealed before this big shootout. Everyone ends up dead. And the last moment of that shootout is the teacher approaching our father that we've been following the whole time and hitting him over the head and knocking him out. And the final scene is the father chained in that same factory for the whole movie. And basically the teacher says, now this is your last meal. And it was also revealed somewhere in that last section that the teacher was involved in this because something similar had happened to someone in his life. He didn't really get specific, maybe his own daughter, but he also was out for revenge. So that's why he was so invested. He was not just doing it out of friendship. He was in the same boat as the father. The teacher and the father were in the same boat. One difference. The father was in cahoots with this whole gang. So obviously he knew that they were killing girls, filming it, sending it out to people. Basically, the whole point all the way along somewhat had been made off to the side that if you're involved with this gang at all, you're guilty. And that's the whole idea of what is guilty. And at this point, the father, chained to the wall, is saying, like, I never knew what I was just like the person who shipped things out. I never even knew what I was shipping. I never saw them. I didn't know what I was doing. So he's like the Nazi who worked at the entrance to the camp, and he didn't know anything about what was going in the camp, supposedly, or the people that lived next door to the camp. We didn't know what was going on in there. He's trying to claim that he has no guilt because he didn't know. But the teacher doesn't buy that. And we're not ever told for sure, but the implication is This guy probably knew. This guy, the way we've seen him act, he's probably very, very guilty. He's probably not guilty of doing anything to his own daughter. We don't know for sure, but probably not. But he's equally guilty if he knew the stuff was going on to other girls. And you saw the way he looked at that girl in the alleyway, and you feel like he's got something really bad going on there. So the final moments are our teacher rolls up the TV and he says, I've seen the tape of your daughter, and now you're going to see it too. And he puts in the tape. We never see the tape, but he puts in the tape and walks away. And the implication is that the best revenge he could get is forcing the father to see what he's been complicit with, like what evil he has helped reign upon the world and what he is part of. It's I think it's a pretty effective and pretty haunting finale to the movie, and I think it really, really works well. Really be interested in hearing the take by Greg and or Erik of this movie. I think they'd both really like it, but I'm not sure if they're going to get to it.